Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo across years. He didn't know their names. They were just two hungry girls on the edge of a quiet road. But what started as a sandwich and a silent promise turned into something no one, especially him, could have imagined. If stories of second chances, quiet love, and everyday miracles speak to you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now let me tell you a story about how one struggling man gave what little he had, and how life found a way to give it all back. The Kansas sun was beginning to lean westward, drenching the horizon in honeyed amber, as Eli Turner shifted his grip on the steering wheel of his rusted '98 Chevy Silverado. The road ahead was long and straight, just like every day of his life, since he lost his wife to cancer and their only son to a rare disease. He didn't take shortcuts, not in carpentry, not in life, and certainly not on this stretch of Highway 21. He followed it home every evening, mile after mile, as if routine was the only thing left tying him to the world. The radio perpetually stuck between country ballads, and static crackled as he passed the old grain silo. Eli turned it off. Silence suited him. It was honest. Then something caught his eye, a flash, a glint just ahead on the right side of the road. His brow furrowed. It shimmered for a second, then disappeared. Reflexively, he eased off the gas. As he drew closer, he saw them two small figures huddled by the ditch. One was lying motionless on the ground, curled into herself like a sleeping fawn. The other, standing shakily, held a piece of broken mirror, or tin, angling it toward the sun. Then she raised her arm and waved, not frantically, not like a child calling for help. She signaled deliberately with intent, like a lighthouse beacon in a storm. Eli's foot slammed on the brake. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. The truck screeched as he pulled over onto the shoulder gravel scattering beneath the tires. He jumped out, boots crunching over dry grass, and ran toward them. The girl standing was maybe 6, no older. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried tears, but her eyes, green and fierce, locked onto his with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Please," she rasped. "She hasn't moved. I tried. I don't know what else to do." Eli dropped to his knees beside the unconscious girl, her twin, no doubt. She was burning up, skin pale, lips cracked, breathing shallow. "How long has she been like this?" Eli asked, already shrugging off his flannel shirt to wrap around the girl's frail body. The standing girl hesitated. "Since morning. Maybe before that. We walked too far. She gave me the last granola bar. I told her not to. No food, no water, no shelter." Eli's heart clenched. His mind raced. He had nothing in the truck, no snacks, no first aid kit. He wasn't expecting anything other than silence on this drive home. He dug through his glove compartment anyway, and by sheer miracle found something he hadn't seen in years, a military-grade glucose tab sealed in dusty foil, left over from his days as a National Guard field medic. He unwrapped it with trembling fingers, bit it in half, and placed a portion between the girl's lips, coaxing it gently into her mouth with a few drops of saliva. Then he pulled her closer and cradled her against his chest, wrapping her and her sister, both in his shirt and coat, warming them with his own body heat. Time seemed to freeze. The wind rustled through corn stalks in the distance. A hawk circled overhead. Eli could feel the girl's weak pulse flutter like a moth in his palm. "Come on, kid," he murmured. "Stay with me. You don't get to leave today." The older twin, Hazel, she would later tell him, watched everything with an intensity beyond her years. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She knelt beside him and placed one small, filthy hand on her sister's forehead. "She always tries to be the strong one," she said. Voice small but steady. But today was my turn. A distant sound pierced the quiet, a siren faint but approaching. Eli turned his head. A farmhand must have seen the scene and called 911. Relief swept through him, but it didn't ease the tightness in his chest. He looked down at the little girl in his arms, now stirring faintly, her eyelids fluttering open just an inch. Hazel leaned in and whispered something only her sister could hear. The girl gave a ghost of a nod. Eli watched them, overwhelmed by a wave of something he hadn't felt in years, not since his own son passed. It was purpose, not obligation, not pity. Purpose. As the ambulance came into view, its lights flashing silently across the fields, Hazel grabbed Eli's sleeve. "You don't have to stay," she said, almost whispering. "But thank you." Eli looked at her, really looked, and saw not a child, but a survivor. And beside her, a sister who had nearly died, so the other could live. He gave a small, quiet nod. "I'm not going anywhere." The hospital smelled like antiseptic and resignation. Eli stood just inside the pediatric emergency wing of the small-town clinic. Arms crossed his flannel shirt, now tied around his waist, stained with dust sweat, and something faintly metallic. Nurses moved swiftly around him, their sneakers whispering across the linoleum floor, but no one asked him to leave. Somehow, he looked like he belonged, like someone who had seen things, survived things, and stayed put anyway. He didn't sit, not because there wasn't a chair, but because he didn't trust what might happen if he let himself rest. Through the window of room 4, he could see them, the twins, separated now by machines and wires. Hazel sat in the corner, a juice box untouched in her lap. Her knees were pulled up to her chest. Hope, the one who had nearly died on the side of the road, was sleeping. A slow, steady beep from the monitor confirmed that her heartbeat, at least for now, was stronger than it had been hours before. Eli exhaled slowly. He had no legal tie to these girls, no blood, no paperwork, no reason to stay. But he hadn't moved since the ambulance arrived. The doctor finally emerged, an older man with a silver beard and gentle, careful eyes. He looked like someone who'd had to deliver too much bad news and learned how to do it softly. "She'll make it," the doctor said. Barely. Her blood sugar was dangerously low, dehydrated, exhausted. But she's responding well now. Another 12 hours and... He didn't need to finish. Eli understood. "Thank you," Eli murmured, voice rough with fatigue. The doctor tilted his head, studying him for a moment. "You their father?" Eli hesitated. "No. Just found them." That word felt inadequate. Found was what you said about loose change, or an old photograph in a drawer, not children lying in a ditch. "Well, whoever you are, the doctor said you were their miracle today." He walked away before Eli could respond. The waiting room couch creaked beneath him hours later. Night had fallen, though he couldn't say exactly when. He watched the nurses change shifts, watched the clock tick, watched the rain start to fall gently against the window. Hazel approached quietly, her tiny footsteps muffled by the carpet. She stood a few feet away, hands balled into fists at her sides. "Are you leaving now?" Eli looked up at her. "Do you want me to?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat beside him, small legs dangling off the edge of the seat. "I don't know what happens now," she said, not looking at him. "What do you mean our grandma's dead? We were staying with her after Mom went away. We don't have a dad. Or anybody, really. Just each other." But sometimes that's not enough. It was a statement so mature, so painfully clear, that Eli had to swallow against the sudden dryness in his throat. "You don't need to worry about that right now," he said. "You need rest." Hazel turned to him, eyes glinting with something both childlike and ancient. "You're wrong," she said. "I don't have time to be a kid." 2 days later, a state social worker named Karen Simmons arrived, clipboard in hand, and polite concern painted across her face. She was younger than Eli expected, but sharp-eyed and professional. She met with him in the hospital cafeteria while the twins were being evaluated upstairs. Mr. Turner, she began, folding her hands. The girls don't have any surviving relatives we've been able to locate. There was a grandfather, but he passed 4 years ago. Their mother had a record of substance abuse and transient behavior. It's unclear who their father was. Their grandmother died the night I found them, Eli said quietly. Karen nodded. Yes, in her sleep. The girls had been fending for themselves for at least 2 days, maybe more. We're working to find a placement for them in the foster system. For now, the hospital is providing temporary shelter. Eli stared into his coffee. It had gone cold hours ago. Is there another option? He asked. Karen tilted her head. I mean, he said, slowly, deliberately, if I were interested in taking care of them, even temporarily. What would that take? She blinked, surprised. Do you have children of your own? I did, a son. He passed away. I'm sorry. Eli nodded. Me too. Karen leaned back, slightly assessing him, not unkindly. You're not a relative, not a legal guardian, not even a foster parent on file. It's possible, but it'll take screening, home visits, background checks. It's not easy. Eli set the coffee down, pushed it aside. Nothing worth doing ever is. 3 weeks later, the paperwork was in motion. Eli had passed the first wave of checks thanks to a clean background and a reputation around town as a quiet, hard-working man who kept to himself and didn't cause trouble. His house wasn't much, small, drafty, and cluttered with tools, but he fixed it. Repaired the door hinges, added a nightlight in the hallway, stocked the fridge, bought toothbrushes with different colors, found an old teddy bear at a thrift store and stitched the ear back on with his clumsy fingers. Hazel moved in cautiously. She didn't trust easily. Hope followed with her soft eyes and quieter presence, clinging to Eli at night when the wind whistled through the windows. He wasn't their father, but he was there. Every morning, every night. And in a world full of people who disappeared sometimes, that was enough. The first meal they shared was oatmeal, not the instant kind that came in colorful packets, but the real stuff, thick and lumpy, boiled in a dented pot Eli had used since his National Guard days. He'd added a pinch of cinnamon and a drizzle of honey he'd found buried in the back of the pantry. It wasn't much, but it smelled like something that might belong in a real home. Hope sat quietly at the table, her knees drawn up under the oversized t-shirt Eli had found for her in a donation box. Hazel stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the wind press against the curtain. Neither girl spoke. Eli set down 3 mismatched bowls, followed by 3 metal spoons, each one slightly bent in its own unique way. No raisins? Hazel asked flatly. Eli raised an eyebrow. No raisins. I figured I'd wait to be judged until at least breakfast number 2. A long silence stretched between them. Then Hazel walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat. Hope followed, climbing onto hers like it was a mountain she hadn't scaled in days. They ate slowly, each bite, hesitant, as if testing the air as much as the flavor. Eli took a spoonful and chewed. I was thinking, he said carefully, maybe we could make a fire tonight. In the backyard. I've got a little fire pit. Nothing fancy. But I figure if you're going to be here for a while, might as well do something a little warm. Hazel didn't look up from her bowl. Fires are dangerous. They can be, Eli replied. But if you know how to build them right, they keep you alive. Hope looked at him, then really looked, as if the words meant more than what he said. Like she understood he wasn't just talking about kindling and wood. That night, as the sky turned violet and the stars blinked into existence one by one, Eli crouched in the backyard with a bundle of dry sticks and old newspaper. Hazel and Hope sat side by side on an overturned log, each with a blanket draped over their shoulders like shawls. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine sap mixed with the subtle sweetness of charred wood. Eli struck the match with practiced care and lit the crumpled newspaper beneath the kindling. Within moments, a thin tongue of flame licked upward, growing slowly, patiently, like it had nothing to prove. Fire's a lot like people, Eli said, sitting back on his haunches. Treat it with care, give it time. Don't crowd it too fast, and it'll grow. Hazel raised an eyebrow. Is that your dad? Wisdom? He smiled faintly. Something like that. Hope reached her small hands toward the warmth. The firelight flickered across her face, catching the quiet wonder in her eyes. I used to be afraid of the dark, she whispered. Still am, Hazel muttered. Hope ignored her. But I'm not tonight. Eli didn't reply. He didn't need to. The fire spoke for all of them, crackling softly, dancing with light alive, in a way that words rarely could be. Over the next few weeks, a rhythm emerged. Every morning, Eli made oatmeal. Sometimes he managed to scrounge up bananas or powdered milk. Once he surprised them with peanut butter stirred in. The girls began waking up without prompting. Hazel even started making her bed, though she didn't fold the blanket, just flipped it neatly like a card dealer. School arrangements were still pending. Karen, the social worker, was working on temporary enrollment, but paperwork took time. In the meantime, Eli gave them assignments. Hope was to write one new sentence every day. Hazel was to teach him one thing she thought he didn't know. The first thing Hazel taught him was that cats can survive falling from higher places than dogs. Not because they're smarter, she clarified, but because they're more flexible. Sounds like someone I know, Eli said. Hazel rolled her eyes, but her lips tugged upward just slightly. One afternoon it rained. Not the soft drizzle kind, but a relentless downpour that turned the roads to mud and brought the smell of wet hay through the window screens. The girls sat at the kitchen table playing with buttons Eli had dumped from an old jar he used to keep spare screws in. Hope arranged hers by color lavender blue moss green. Hazel stacked hers into a tower, daring gravity to challenge her. Eli watched them from the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag after fixing the leaky bathroom sink. Something in him relaxed, a feeling he hadn't allowed in years. Not comfort. Not yet. But permission. Permission to hope. Permission to care. Permission to try again. That night they built another fire. Hope brought marshmallows, soggy but salvageable from a forgotten grocery bag. Hazel found skewers in the junk drawer. Eli burned the first one. Hope giggled. Hazel called him a rookie. He let himself laugh too. Later, as they sat shoulder to shoulder beneath the stars, Hazel turned to him and asked the question he knew was coming. Are we staying here? He hesitated. That's up to you, I think. Hope's voice was soft, but sure, I want to. Hazel didn't answer, but she leaned her head lightly against his arm. And in the language of quiet children and broken men, that was more than enough. It started with a slow drip, barely noticeable at first, just the sound of a single drop of water hitting the kitchen floor late at night, somewhere between a sigh and a whisper. Eli thought it might have been the faucet, but when he checked, everything was dry. Then the next day during lunch, it rained. A real autumn storm, sharp, cold, and merciless. And that's when the ceiling opened up like a wound. The girls were in the living room, Hope drawing quietly, while Hazel practiced taping up a torn book spine with surgical precision. Eli had just pulled a casserole out of the oven, a strange amalgam of canned beans, frozen peas, and elbow macaroni, when he heard the sound again. Not a drip this time. A splat, followed by a crack. He turned to see water pooling on the linoleum just beneath the ceiling seam above the pantry. A small bulge had formed in the drywall, discolored, soft, threatening to give way. Girls, he called, already grabbing a mop. Stay out of the kitchen. Hazel appeared in the doorway, frowning. Is it bad? I've seen worse, Eli said. It was true. He'd seen worse, just not recently. and never while two kids relied on him to keep a roof over their heads. That night, after the girls went to bed, with bowls of reheated soup and a few pages of a bedtime story, Eli climbed into the attic with a flashlight and a toolbox. The rain had seeped through two beams, one of which was cracked and spongy to the touch. The insulation was soaked, and part of the plywood under the shingles had begun to rot. He sat in the low, dusty space and ran a hand through his hair. His shoulder ached, his lower back throbbed, and for the first time since the girls had come into his life, he felt fear, not for himself, but for them. He didn't have money for a contractor, not even for supplies. The last job he'd worked had barely covered groceries and heating oil. He had no credit cards, no safety net, just the promise he'd made to himself to them that he wouldn't walk away. But promises didn't patch roofs. The next morning he made oatmeal anyway. Hazel poked at hers. "You look tired." Eli smiled weakly. "I've looked worse." Hope slid her spoon into her mouth, eyes watching him carefully. "You're worried." He looked at them. Two small faces, framed by tangled hair and oversized sweatshirts, and knew he couldn't lie. "Yeah," he said. "A little." Hazel pushed her bowl away. "Is it the roof?" Eli blinked. "How you were in the attic last night. And your boots are still wet. You're not as sneaky as you think." There it was again, that quiet, cutting intelligence she carried like armor. "I'll figure it out," he said. Hazel didn't reply, but she stood up, took her bowl to the sink, rinsed it carefully, and dried it like she had something to prove. 2 days later, the inevitable happened. Eli was replacing shingles alone, balancing precariously on the slope of the roof when the ladder shifted. He tried to steady himself, but the wood was slick with dew. One boot lost traction. Then the world tilted. He fell hard, shoulder first, onto the ground below, landing in a tangle of limbs and gravel. The pain was immediate and blinding. His vision blurred. The edges of the sky pulsed. He tried to sit up, but his right arm screamed in protest. The neighbors were gone for the week. His phone had been left inside. He couldn't even shout, the breath had been knocked out of him. And then feet. Small, pounding feet on the porch steps. Hazel. Her eyes were wide with terror, her hands trembling. But she didn't panic. "Hope," she shouted. "Call 911. Now, she knelt beside him, trying to hold his head steady like he'd once done for her sister. "Don't move," she whispered. "Help's coming." "You're not allowed to leave," remember. Eli tried to speak but only managed a grunt. Hazel swallowed hard. "You promised." At the hospital, the verdict came quickly. Fractured, clavicle bruised, ribs, possible ligament strain in the right shoulder. He'd be out of commission for at least 4 weeks. No lifting, no climbing, no working, no income. He sat on the stiff mattress in a paper gown, while a nurse gently adjusted the sling on his arm. "Lucky," she said. "Could have been a lot worse." He nodded, but he didn't feel lucky. Not yet. Outside the room, he could hear Hazel arguing with the doctor about visiting hours, and Hope humming quietly to herself, like everything was going to be okay, even if it wasn't. Back home, confined to the couch, Eli was forced to surrender. Hazel became the de facto manager of the household, organizing groceries, checking his bandages, timing medication. Hope read aloud from the stack of donated library books. They each did chores, folded laundry, brought him soup. One night while the fire crackled in the backyard pit, Hazel brought him a small cardboard box. Inside was his harmonica, the one he hadn't seen in years, the one he'd lost. "I found it at the pawn shop," Hazel said almost defiantly. "The guy remembered you, said he didn't want to sell it to anyone else. So I made a deal." "What kind of deal?" Eli asked, his voice tight. "I gave him my bracelet, the one with the little locket." Eli stared at her, stunned. "You didn't have to." "Yes," Hazel interrupted. "I did." She folded his fingers around the harmonica. because now it's your turn to heal. The envelope was thick, cream-colored heavy stock and marked by an embossed insignia Eli didn't recognize. It had no return address, just his name, handwritten in precise calligraphy, Eli Turner, followed by his address on the corner of Walnut Street, and quiet anonymity. Hazel was the one who brought it in, clutching it like something radioactive. It was in the mailbox. The guy who delivered it was wearing a suit. Eli took the envelope from her slowly. His first instinct was suspicion. Scam, lawsuit, some bureaucratic mistake, waiting to unravel everything he'd barely managed to rebuild. The kind of letter that usually meant paperwork, courtrooms, or government forms that required documents he didn't have. But when he turned it over, he saw a seal pressed into red wax. WPH, 3 initials in an old-world script, a formality not seen in modern America. It felt like something out of another time, like it had traveled across decades, just to land here on his kitchen table, next to a chipped coffee mug and a box of off-brand cereal. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he sat down in the kitchen chair, with a wobbly leg set the letter in front of him, and stared at it, while the girls finished their homework at the other end of the table. Hope glanced over, eyes wide. "Is it from a king?" Hazel scoffed. "Kings don't send mail. You don't know that," Hope muttered. Eli smiled faintly. "Maybe it's from a queen." He picked up the envelope, tore the seal carefully, and unfolded the letter. It was written on high-quality stationery, the ink dark and deliberate. The salutation read simply, "To the guardian of Hazel and Hope." Eli's pulse slowed as he read. "My name was Walter Percival Hartman. If you are reading this, it means the girl's maternal grandmother has passed, and this letter has been released according to the instructions of my estate. I am, or was, their great-grandfather. I never met them. A long estrangement between myself and their mother made that impossible, but I have watched them from afar, ensured they had what little stability I could manage, even without revealing my name. It is now time for them to receive what I have set aside for them, an inheritance of both value and legacy. But first, I must know that the hands that have held them are strong, good, and honorable. If you are reading this, I suspect you are those hands." Eli stopped reading for a moment. The room had gone silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock above the fridge. He scanned the rest of the letter. It went on to explain that a legal representative would be in contact within the week, and that the girl's inheritance was conditional, not on blood, but on character. A clause apparently had been written into the trust, stating that if the girls were found to be in the care of someone who had nurtured them with selflessness, integrity, and love, the full inheritance would be granted. And the most shocking part: the girls themselves will decide how to divide the legacy. Hazel was the first to speak. "So, wait, we're rich." Hope blinked. "I thought we were just lucky." Eli exhaled, setting the letter down. "We don't know anything yet," he said. "It could be a mistake." "But it has our names," Hazel said. "And mine." The room held a new kind of silence now, not tense, but weighted. Hope reached for Eli's hand, curling her small fingers into his. "What if it's not a mistake?" she asked softly. "What if it's a thank you?" Eli looked down at her. "For what?" Hope shrugged. "For loving us." The following Wednesday, the man from the letter arrived. He was tall, lean, and meticulously dressed. A charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, silver tie clip. He introduced himself as Mr. Callahan, legal executor of the Hartman estate. He carried a briefcase and a calmness that Eli found unsettling. They sat in the living room, the girls perched on either arm of the couch like curious owls, while Mr. Callahan opened the briefcase and laid out a series of documents. "This is not a lottery," he said almost gently. "This is a legacy. The estate left behind by Mr. Hartman is significant, not only in its monetary value, but in the intent behind it. He paused. The late Mr. Hartman included a very specific clause that the full inheritance 12 distinct gifts would only be granted if the girls themselves believed their guardian had truly loved and protected them, not for gain, but out of genuine care. 12 gifts, Hope echoed. Mr. Callahan nodded. Yes, each representing something Mr. Hartman valued: education, shelter, music, memory health. The list goes on. But the girls, Hazel and Hope, must choose how those 12 gifts are used and who receives them. Hazel narrowed her eyes. You're saying we decide? Yes, Mr. Callahan said, turning to Eli. And should you be the recipient of any or all of those gifts, it will be solely because they chose you. Nothing is automatic. Nothing is assumed. Eli looked at the girls. For a moment, fear flickered behind his calm. Not fear of rejection, but the weight of what he didn't deserve. But Hope was already nodding. And Hazel slow-guarded. Hazel looked him in the eye and said simply, "We already made our decision the day he stayed." That night, after Mr. Callahan left, Eli sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea and a heart full of something he couldn't name. The girls had gone inside to plan secretive whispering, giggling in a way they hadn't in months, maybe years. He looked up at the stars. Maybe this wasn't a gift. Maybe it was a mirror. And maybe he was finally ready to see who he'd become. The packages arrived at dawn, not with fanfare or ceremony, just a modest delivery van pulling into the driveway, while the sky was still gray with sleep. The driver, a young woman in a red fleece jacket, handed Eli a clipboard and smiled like she'd been in on a secret. Special delivery, she said. 12 of them, actually. Eli blinked down at the clipboard. Each box had been shipped from a different location. A vineyard in Oregon, a recording studio in Nashville, a craftsman's shop in Vermont, a university in Boston, a medical clinic in Minneapolis. 12 origins, 12 destinations, all with his name on the label. Hazel and Hope hovered behind him barefoot on the porch steps in their pajamas, clutching mugs of cocoa. You weren't supposed to wake up yet, Hazel mumbled. Eli looked over his shoulder, brow raised. You did this, Hope beamed. Sort of. We planned it. Mr. Callahan made it happen. We made a list, Hazel added, of everything you gave us. Then we found a way to give it back, but better. Eli stared at the towering stack of boxes now being rolled carefully toward the porch. Each one was wrapped in simple brown paper and twine with a wax seal marked W.P.H. Walter Percival Hartman, the ghost of a great-grandfather none of them had ever met, but who somehow knew how to reach across time and consequence with uncanny precision. They opened the first box together. Inside was a deed to a modest 2-bedroom house in the same town just 2 blocks from the elementary school, with a wraparound porch and an actual fireplace. It had been renovated by a veterans housing program, complete with ADA accessible features and fully paid property taxes for 10 years. Hope read the description aloud, her voice trembling with excitement. Hazel handed Eli the key. He stared at it in his palm, weightless and heavy all at once. You always said this place wasn't really yours, Hazel whispered. Now you'll have one that is. The second box held something he hadn't seen in a decade, his old guitar. Scuffed, worn, and still carrying the faint scent of pine from the campfires he used to play beside. It had been lost in a storage unit after his son's funeral. Eli lifted it from its velvet-lined case fingers, instinctively tracing the curve of its neck. How? He began. Hope reached into the box and pulled out a folded receipt. It showed up in an estate sale in Topeka. We called everyone on Facebook until we found the woman who bought it. She gave it back when she heard your name. Eli swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. You don't have to, Hope said. Just play again. Box after box was opened, each one a testimony, not to wealth, but to witnessing a recognition of the quiet sacrifices Eli had made and the love he had never demanded, but always given. Box 3. A full scholarship for both girls to attend the private school across town, including tutoring and meals. Box 4. A home recording studio setup, complete with microphone, laptop, and sound software, because Hope had once whispered she wanted to compose music like the lullabies Eli hummed. Box 5. A complete tool set, top of the line, engraved with his initials. Hazel beamed. So you never have to borrow duct tape from the neighbors again. Box 6. A hand-stitched quilt made from photos and fabric scraps from their time together. The center square held 3 stitched silhouettes, a man and 2 girls walking into a sunset. Eli couldn't speak for a long time after that one. Box 7 was the strangest. It was small, no larger than a lunchbox, and wrapped in silver foil. Inside, Eli found a single harmonica, not his old one, but a new model gleaming and untouched. A note was taped to the inside. "So you never stop breathing music into our world." He set it aside gently as if it were made of glass. The final 5 boxes arrived late. Mr. Callahan returned that afternoon, stepping onto the porch with the air of someone carrying not gifts, but legacies. "These are the last 5, he said. Chosen with care." Box 8. A certificate of health insurance, full coverage for Eli for the next 10 years, funded anonymously. Box 9. A photo album filled with candid shots Eli didn't even know existed, him pushing Hope on a swing. Hazel resting her head on his shoulder during a backyard movie night, the 3 of them holding hands at a community picnic. Someone had been documenting their life, not with cameras, but with memory. Box 10. A journal bound in leather titled, "Things My Dad Taught Me." Inside were Hazel and Hope's handwritten pages, every entry dated, every lesson remembered. Box 11. A letter from Walter Hartman himself, typed formal but painfully sincere. "If redemption can be inherited, then perhaps this is my inheritance. Thank you for loving them when I could not." And finally, Box 12. It wasn't addressed to Eli. It was addressed to Sarah Whitmore. Eli frowned, confused. The girls exchanged mischievous glances. "She helped you once," Hazel said. "At the hospital, remember? She visited after you fell from the roof. She wrote us letters after she moved away. She asked about you." Eli opened the box. Inside was a train ticket, one way, from Oregon to Kansas, and beneath it a handwritten note. "If you're still playing music, I'd like to listen again." That night, Eli stood on the new porch of his new home, watching the girls dance barefoot in the yard, their laughter rising with the smoke of a small backyard fire. He held the guitar close, then the harmonica. Then he closed his eyes and played. A soft, wandering tune, not sad, not joyful, just whole. 12 boxes, 12 keys. But the real gift was never the contents. It was that someone had watched him long enough to know exactly what to send. Eli Turner had never owned a front porch before. He'd worked on them, built them repaired railings, sanded floorboards, until they were smooth enough for a rocking chair. But never had one that was his. Now he stood barefoot on this one coffee, in hand, the morning light still soft enough to cast long shadows on the boards beneath his feet. The wind moved gently through the wind chimes, hanging from the corner beam, simple copper pipes Hope had found at a flea market, and insisted they hang first thing. The sound was soft, meditative, like memory dressed in music. He sat on the porch swing, its chains creaking as he settled in, and for the first time in years, let stillness wash over him without guilt. The girls were still asleep upstairs. Their rooms were painted now Hazel's, in a muted sage green, Hope's in sky blue. Posters hung on the walls, strings of paper stars across their ceilings. Their laughter had already begun to echo through the rooms like it belonged there. And that might have been the strangest part, that the house didn't feel new. It felt like it had always been theirs. Later that afternoon, Hazel padded down the stairs with a small notebook tucked under her arm. She sat across from Eli at the kitchen table and slid the notebook toward him. "I want to show you something," she said, "but you have to promise you won't do the dad thing where you pretend not to cry." Eli raised an eyebrow. "I don't cry," she smirked. "You cry in harmonica." He opened the notebook. The first page was neatly labeled, "The Day We Found You." It wasn't a diary. It was a record, a chronology of moments Hazel had written down over the past year. Observations, feelings, conversations. Each entry was short, but weighty. Day 3. He let us choose the cereal. That meant something. Day 11, he fixed the leaky faucet but didn't tell us. I only noticed because the drip stopped. That's the kind of man he is. Day 24, I heard him whisper our names in a prayer. I pretended I was asleep. By the time Eli reached the final entry, he had stopped pretending his eyes weren't wet. Day 320, we came into his house as strangers. But somehow, without asking, he gave us the language to call it home. That evening after dinner, they sat together on the porch. Hope was doodling in her sketch pad. Hazel balanced a book on her knees, flipping pages absent-mindedly. Eli played a slow tune on his guitar, a melody without lyrics, just feeling. A car slowed on the road, a familiar one, a silver sedan with Oregon plates. Eli stopped strumming. Hope sat up straight. Hazel grinned into her book like she'd known all along. Sarah Whitmore stepped out of the car. She hadn't changed much, same kind eyes, same soft-spoken presence, though the streak of gray in her hair had deepened. She wore a navy blue cardigan and carried a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. "Still can't tune a guitar to save your life," she said, stepping onto the porch. Eli stood unsure whether to speak or smile, or just breathe. "Sarah," he said, finally. She nodded. "You didn't really think I'd ignore a one-way ticket, did you?" He opened his arms slowly. She stepped into them like she'd been waiting years. The girls watched from the porch, swing, wordless, but smiling, two matchmakers disguised as daughters. The next morning, Eli showed Sarah the house, room by room. Not as a tour, but as a story. She touched the walls, ran her fingers along the edge of the fireplace, sat at the kitchen table where the girls had once eaten oatmeal in silence. "You've built something beautiful here," she said. Eli shook his head. "I just kept showing up. They did the rest." Over the next few weeks, Sarah became part of their rhythm. She baked, taught Hope basic violin, sat with Hazel, and challenged her on logic puzzles that would have made Eli's head spin. But more than that, she brought balance. Eli found himself laughing more, sleeping better, sometimes doing nothing at all. And that perhaps was the true miracle that a man who had lived for so long in grief's shadow now lived in light without fear. It would vanish. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, Hazel found a dusty box of Eli's old photos. Some were yellowed, others curled at the edges. Among them, a picture of a younger Eli holding a tiny boy, his son, by a lakeside campfire. Hazel brought it inside and set it quietly on the mantel next to a newer photo Eli Hope and Hazel covered in flour, mid-laughter, making cookies that had turned into strange melted shapes. Eli noticed it later that evening. Two lives, side by side, not replacing, just coexisting. That night, wind rustled through the trees. The wind chimes sang. Eli sat on the porch swing beside Sarah, her hand resting on his knee, steady and familiar. Hope's music drifted from the upstairs window, soft piano chords. Hazel's voice rose in harmony. "They're writing something Sarah said." "They always are," Eli replied. He looked out across the yard, the old swing, the fire pit, the garden the girls had started from scratch. This wasn't just a house. It was a memory being made, a legacy unfolding. And for the first time in a very long time, Eli Turner knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. It was a Tuesday morning when Eli realized he was looking forward to the sound of Sarah's footsteps. Not in the grand, sweeping way that love stories often claimed no dramatic music, no breathless stares, but in the quiet tick of routine. The tap of her boots on the porch, the way her scarf trailed behind her as she walked from the car, the soft creak of the screen door opening and closing when she came inside, always with something in her hands, a bag of fresh peaches, a borrowed book, a song on a USB drive. She moved like someone who had learned not to rush joy. And Eli was beginning to understand that kind of movement himself. Sarah had taken to spending 2 or 3 days a week at the house. She never assumed permanence. She never overstepped. But she brought warmth, like someone who'd lived in cold places and finally found sunlight she trusted. On this particular morning, she stood in the kitchen next to Eli barefoot, stirring a pot of blueberry compote on the stove. Her blue scarf was draped over a chair, and her reading glasses sat low on her nose. Eli watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You always wear blue." Sarah glanced up, amused. "And you just noticed I'm observant." "Just slow." She smiled. "It's my anchor color. Anchor. Something constant. Something that reminds me I'm still me no matter what season I'm walking through." Eli considered that. "Mine might be oatmeal." Sarah laughed. It was the kind of laugh that warmed a room faster than any fire. Later that afternoon, Eli took Sarah to the field, behind the house, the one where Hope liked to pick wildflowers, and Hazel sometimes read alone under the trees. The air was mild, the sky cloudless. They walked slowly, shoulders brushing, but never fully touching. He stopped near the old oak stump and sat. She joined him, folding her legs beneath her. Do you ever think, Eli began, that the most important moments don't look like moments at all? They're just regular days, regular walks. Sarah nodded. Like this one? Yeah. He looked down at his hands, rough from work but no longer clenched by grief. I spent a lot of years walking around half empty, he said quietly. Told myself that was safer. That wanting more was selfish. Sarah didn't rush him. But then the girls came, he continued. And they didn't ask me to be more. They just looked at me like I already was. And somehow that made me want to live up to it. Sarah reached out, placed her hand gently over his. You did. They sat in companionable silence for a while. Then Sarah spoke. After Daniel died, she said, referring to her husband. For the first time since she returned, I stopped singing. We used to play together, him on piano, me with vocals. Every Sunday, every family wedding, every church picnic. She looked out toward the horizon. But after he passed, silence felt safer. I thought if I made noise again, it would hurt more. Eli nodded. I know that silence. Sarah turned back to him. But then I heard you, Eli. That night at the hospital when you were playing harmonica for Hope. It was off-key and a little too slow. But it was the first sound in months that didn't make me want to run. Eli chuckled. That might be the kindest insult I've ever received. She squeezed his hand. It was a beginning. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grass. Sarah leaned her head gently on Eli's shoulder. Do you think we get more than one chance? She asked. Eli looked up at the sky. The clouds were slow-moving, drifting like thoughts that no longer had to rush. I don't know if we get more than one, he said. But I think if we survive the first loss, we start seeing chances where we didn't before. She closed her eyes. Then maybe this is mine. That night, they cooked dinner together, Sarah chopping vegetables while Eli grilled. Hope played violin softly in the background, Hazel humming along. It wasn't a performance, just a moment stitched into the quiet fabric of home. After dinner, they all sat on the porch. Hope leaned against Eli's side. Hazel curled up with her head on Sarah's lap, a book open, but unread. The stars blinked to life above them. Eli looked across the yard, the swing, the fire pit, the house glowing from within. And then he looked at Sarah. She met his gaze. And in the unspoken language of people who'd known grief and grown from it, they said yes to this moment, to this family, to the love that had arrived not in a whirlwind, but on wind chimes and blueberry mornings. It arrived on a Sunday morning, folded neatly in a brown paper package, tied with twine, and a single sprig of lavender tucked beneath the knot. No return address, no note, just a tag with Eli's name in Hazel's careful, slanted handwriting. Hope carried it inside like it was sacred. Eli opened the package at the kitchen table, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a quilt, hand-stitched soft to the touch, and visibly imperfect in the way only something made with love can be. It was beautiful. Not polished, not professional. Just true. The squares weren't traditional. No repeating patterns, no symmetry. Instead, each patch told a story. There was a piece of Hazel's old sweatshirt, the one with the faded rocket ship she used to wear every other day. There was a corner from the flannel shirt Eli had wrapped around Hope the night he'd found them, a scrap of the first dish towel Sarah had brought over, still faintly patterned with lemons, and in the center, stitched in deep blue thread on a square of ivory cotton, were 3 names: Eli, Hazel, Hope. Underneath in smaller print, chosen, not given, but always family. Eli ran his fingers over the stitches. Some were tight, others loose, wandering off like they'd been pulled by thought. The unevenness made it perfect. He looked up. Hazel stood by the doorway, pretending to read a book she wasn't holding properly. Hope leaned against the counter, watching carefully, chewing her lip. "Who taught you to sew?" Eli asked. Hazel shrugged. "YouTube. And Mrs. Fenner down the street. She has a sewing circle on Thursdays. You joined a sewing circle." Hope grinned. "She's the youngest member by about 50 years. Eli stood, walked over, and gently pulled Hazel into his arms. She stiffened for a second. She always did, but then melted, resting her forehead against his chest. "Thank you," he said. "For every stitch. You gave us the fabric," she whispered. That night, Eli spread the quilt over the porch swing and sat with Sarah beneath it. Hope played soft melodies on her violin from the living room, and Hazel read a new book, her feet dangling off the arm of the couch. The stars were sharp and clear overhead. The wind chimes sang something gentle. Sarah traced a patch near the edge, white cotton with faint yellow stars. "This one's from your old pillowcase," she said. Eli smiled. "Didn't think you'd notice." "I notice everything about you." He turned toward her. There it was again, the quiet intimacy that had grown, not in grand gestures, but in the spaces between. The way she reached for his hand, without needing a reason. The way he let her in without fear. She'd walk away. "I never thought I'd get this," Eli said softly. Sarah tilted her head. "Get what a second shot. Not at love, I could have lived without that. But at being seen." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We don't get seen until we let someone stand close enough." The next morning, Hazel pinned the quilt on the wall behind the piano. It was a bold choice, neither decorative nor subtle, but somehow it belonged there. Visitors commented on it immediately. "It's our story," Hazel said once to a neighbor. No one argued. Later that week, Eli found himself walking past the quilt in the quiet hours of early morning. The girls were still asleep. Sarah had taken an early shift at the clinic. The house was still. He sat on the piano bench and just looked. At the square from Hope's hospital gown, at the one made from his old army undershirt, at the triangle of lace from Sarah's scarf. It was all there, the heartbreak, the mending, the laughter, the soup-stained Tuesdays and hard-fought Thursdays. He reached for the harmonica on the shelf and began to play. Just a simple melody, the one Hope had written, the one Hazel had called the morning song. The house breathed around him. The quilt swayed gently in the breeze from the open window. And Eli Turner, a man who once believed his life had narrowed to the size of a tool belt and a quiet ache, realized that it had quietly, irrevocably expanded into color, into story, into a kind of love that didn't have to declare itself to be real. That evening, the girls invited Sarah to dinner like it was a formal occasion. They lit candles, folded napkins. Hazel made roasted chicken with garlic butter, with help from the neighbor's slow cooker. Hope set out place cards in her best cursive. At the end of the meal, Hazel stood up and cleared her throat. "We'd like to make a toast," she said, lifting her glass of sparkling cider. "To quilts," she said, "made of things that shouldn't match, but somehow do." Hope raised hers. To songs that start in silence, Eli lifted his. To second chances, and Sarah, eyes glistening, added softly to being found. It had started as a joke. Hope had scribbled a melody on the back of a grocery list, just a handful of notes she hummed one evening while folding laundry. Eli picked it up, curious. He whistled the first few bars, added a harmony beneath it, then handed it back. Hazel called it the laundry song. Hope revised the title to When the Music Came Home. The name stuck. Over the weeks that followed, the melody evolved first on paper, then on piano. One evening, Sarah added a gentle violin line, tentative at first, but full of grace. Eli brought in the harmonica, soft and breathy. Hazel, reluctant as ever, eventually joined with the kind of spoken-word poetry that felt like she was reading straight from her soul. And before any of them realized it, they'd composed something together. Not just a song, a memory, a legacy. It wasn't a performance. No one planned it that way. But on a breezy Sunday afternoon in October, Eli set up a few folding chairs in the backyard under the shade of the oak trees. Hope moved the keyboard outside. Hazel brought out the quilt to hang behind them as a backdrop, and Sarah printed simple programs on the library printer, a quiet concert, for no one and everyone. Neighbors wandered over, drawn by the sight of string lights being draped across the fence, the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls, and the sound of laughter that lingered like sunlight. Eli didn't know how it happened, but by the time the sun dipped below the trees, there were over 24 people seated in that little yard, mugs of cider and hand blankets across their laps, waiting without knowing what exactly for. Hope stepped up, first cleared her throat and smiled. "My name's Hope," she said, voice trembling just slightly. "This is my sister Hazel. That's our dad Eli. And this is Sarah. She plays violin and makes the best blueberry scones in the world." Scattered laughter. Hope glanced back at Eli, who nodded. "We wrote a song," she continued. "Together. Because sometimes you don't know you've found your family until they start singing back to you." Then the music began. Soft piano, gentle violin, a harmonica line that drifted like wind through wheat fields, and Hazel's voice, low, steady, not sung, but spoken. He didn't wear a cape, just flannel and scars. He never said, "I love you," but he said, "I'll fix it." And somehow, that meant more. The song wasn't polished. It wouldn't have impressed a record label. But when they reached the final chord, no one moved. No one clapped. It was the kind of silence that came not from uncertainty, but from reverence, from the kind of stillness that arrives when something sacred has just happened. After the guests filtered out, leaving hugs and tears and casserole dishes behind, Eli sat alone on the porch steps, guitar across his lap. The stars were coming out, slowly blinking into the dark, one by one, like shy guests at a party. Sarah joined him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. They loved it, she said. Eli nodded, fingers still brushing the guitar strings. It wasn't perfect. Neither are we, she replied. That's the whole point. He looked over at her. In the low light, she was all softness edges, blurred by affection and time. You ever think we get lucky twice? He asked. She smiled. Only if we're brave enough to let the first luck go. Eli closed his eyes. He thought of the first melody he played for Hope, shaky, unsure. He thought of Hazel refusing to speak to him for 3 days straight, when he accidentally shrank her hoodie in the dryer. He thought of Sarah walking up the porch steps with her blue scarf and steady eyes. And he thought of the man he used to be, the one who thought his best years were behind him. He exhaled slowly. Then I guess I'm ready. Inside, the girls were already in pajamas. Hope was humming the melody from earlier as she braided Hazel's hair. They paused when Eli walked in, eyes expectant. He looked at them both. My turn, he said. Hazel arched an eyebrow. To do what, Eli reached into the drawer by the fireplace and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a ring silver simple, etched with a small wave pattern around the band. Hope gasped. Hazel blinked. You're gonna propose, aren't you? Eli grinned. Is that a problem? Hazel shrugged. Depends if she says yes. Why don't we find out? Eli walked back out onto the porch, where Sarah was sipping tea and reading the last page of a novel. She looked up as he approached and smiled, because she already knew. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. He just held out the ring in the palm of his hand. This is our house, he said. This is our life. You don't have to say yes. But if you do, you'll never have to walk alone again. Sarah looked down at the ring, then up at the man who had rebuilt his life, not with grand gestures, but with oatmeal-patched roofs and lullabies. And she whispered, I was always saying yes. The morning of the girls' departure came quietly. No dramatic sunrises, no fanfare, just soft, golden light stretching across the floorboards, catching motes of dust as they floated like memories in the air. Eli stood in the kitchen pouring coffee into 2 mugs, while Sarah wrapped blueberry muffins in foil, humming the same tune Hope had composed for their backyard concert. The girls were upstairs packing. College, that strange word. It still didn't sound real when Eli said it aloud. Hazel off to study environmental science in Oregon, armed with logic, stubbornness, and a deeply annotated copy of Silent Spring. Hope accepted into a dual-degree program for music and psychology, a composition portfolio in one hand, a violin case in the other. Eli knew this day would come. He'd even prepared for it emotionally, financially, practically. But no one really prepares for quiet rooms. They had breakfast out on the porch, just like always. The wind chimes sang a familiar tune. Hazel wore her hiking boots, legs crossed under her at the table. Hope had a braid draped over one shoulder, fingers twitching as if composing in her mind even now. Eli passed out their breakfast sandwiches, trying not to look too hard at their faces. Hazel broke the silence first. You're being weird, she said. I'm making breakfast, Eli replied. Exactly. Sarah laughed softly beside him. Hope leaned over, resting her head on Eli's shoulder. We're coming back. It's not the end of the world, I know he said. But he didn't know how to explain that love like this always felt temporary to someone who'd lost before. That even happiness, when hard-earned, still sometimes came wrapped in fear. You're not losing us, Hope said quietly, as if reading his mind. Hazel added, You can't get rid of us that easily. We know your favorite peanut butter and your social security number, Hope said, grinning. Eli chuckled, blinking faster than usual. "You've got 12 miracles," he said. "And I still think the best one is the two of you," Hazel snorted. "We're a handful." Eli reached across the table, placed his calloused hand over theirs. Exactly. At the train station, the goodbye was both ordinary and sacred. Luggage was loaded, tickets scanned, final hugs given with fierce, quiet affection. Hope hugged Sarah first, whispering something that made her cry. Hazel predictably went last, hugging Eli with awkward arms and a tight jaw. "All right," she muttered. Eli smiled. "Even if you don't, I'll wait." She stepped back. "Just don't rearrange my bookshelf while I'm gone." "Too late." Hazel rolled her eyes, but she was grinning. Then the train doors closed, and just like that, the girls were gone off into the wide, unpredictable world, leaving behind a house full of music stories and stitched memories. In the days that followed, Eli wandered the house differently, not with sadness, but with care. He repainted Hazel's bedroom a soft gray like she'd wanted, hung new curtains in Hope's room, tuned the piano, cleaned the gutters, made oatmeal on cold mornings, even if no one else would eat it. Sarah moved in officially that fall. They didn't make a big deal out of it. There was no wedding, not yet. Just a shared dresser, 2 toothbrushes in the cup, and a rhythm that no longer asked for permission. They worked together in the garden. They read side by side at night. Sometimes they said nothing at all and still felt full. And every Sunday afternoon, Eli sat on the porch and played the melody Hope had written. He never used sheet music. He didn't need to. It was inside him now. One afternoon in spring, Eli received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, Hazel's sharp, slanted print. Inside was a single page. Dad. They had a lecture today about family structures. Biological, legal, guardianship, all the usual textbook stuff. I raised my hand and asked if chosen family was officially recognized in sociology yet. The professor said yes, that it was a developing concept, families built not from DNA, but from commitment, from presence, from love. So I gave a speech about you. And I got an A. Just thought you'd want to know. Love, Hazel. Your favorite miracle, but don't tell. Hope. Eli smiled so wide his face hurt. Later that evening, he and Sarah hosted a few neighbors for dinner on the porch. The wind chimes danced. Laughter rose. Someone brought peach cobbler. Sarah poured iced tea into mason jars. At one point, a neighbor leaned over and asked Eli, "So, how's retirement treating you?" Eli blinked. "I'm not retired. But you're always here. Always in that chair playing that tune. You seem finished, like a man who got what he was looking for." Eli paused, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. I did. That night, after the last guest left, and the stars took their place in the sky, Eli stepped outside one last time. He sat on the porch swing quilt, draped over his lap, harmonica in hand. Sarah joined him, resting her head against his shoulder. And together, they listened not to music or words, but to everything they'd built with open hearts and calloused hands. A home, a song, a life. Not perfect, but whole. And still, somehow, just beginning. And maybe that's what love really is. Not always loud, not always grand. Just someone who shows up again and again until the silence finally feels like home. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and share your corner of the world with us. It's always a joy to see how far these quiet stories can reach. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories of kindness, resilience, and second chances, feel free to subscribe. We'd be honored to have you here. Thank you truly for spending your time with this story. From my heart to yours, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the quiet miracles.